The old upright piano sat in the corner of Grandma Chen's living room, its polished wood surface catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains. 4-year-old May sat on the floor nearby, quietly arranging her colorful building blocks while her parents chatted with Grandma over tea. The familiar scent of jasmine filled the cozy apartment, mixing with the faint mustiness of old sheet music that always seemed to hover around the piano. Grandma Chen had once been quite famous in her hometown back in China. Before moving to America 30 years ago, she had performed with orchestras and taught at a prestigious music school. Now in her 70s, her fingers were slightly curved with arthritis, but she still played beautifully every day. Play something. Mom, May's father requested, smiling at his mother across the living room. It's been too long since we've heard you perform. Grandma Chen's eyes crinkled with pleasure as she set down her teacup. What would you like to hear? Something classical, May's mother suggested. Maybe Beethoven? The elderly woman nodded and moved to the piano bench, adjusting it slightly before sitting down. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment as she closed her eyes, seeming to gather herself. Then her fingers descended, and the familiar opening notes of Fur Elise filled the room. The adults continued their conversation in hushed tones as the music provided a gentle backdrop. No one noticed when little May abandoned her blocks and wandered over to stand beside her grandmother, watching intently as those weathered fingers danced across the black and white keys. When Grandma Chen finished playing, she turned to find her granddaughter staring up at her with wide, curious eyes. Did you like that, little one? She asked, patting the space beside her on the bench. May nodded and climbed up, her small legs dangling well above the floor. She pointed to the keys. Can I try? Of course, Grandma Chen laughed, expecting the usual random pounding that came whenever children were allowed near a piano. She prepared herself to wince through the discordant sounds that would surely follow. May placed her tiny hands on the keyboard. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she began to play the opening phrase of Fur Elise, the same melody her grandmother had just performed. The notes weren't perfect, and her small fingers struggled to stretch for some of the reaches, but the tune was unmistakable. The conversation behind them stopped abruptly. May's parents turned to stare as May's father began, rising from his seat. Grandma Chen sat frozen beside her granddaughter, watching in disbelief as those little fingers picked out the melody with surprising accuracy. She had never given May a single piano lesson. The child had simply listened and reproduced what she'd heard. May, her mother called softly, not wanting to break the spell. Have you played piano before? The little girl shook her head without looking up, concentration wrinkling her brow as she tried to remember what came next in the piece. When she hit a wrong note, she frowned slightly and tried again, seemingly guided by an inner sense of what should sound right. May's father pulled out his phone and began recording, his hands trembling slightly. He and his wife exchanged glances of stunned disbelief. Both taught music at the community college. He led the jazz ensemble while she taught music theory, but neither had ever witnessed anything like this. Let me show you, Grandma Chen said gently. Recovering from her surprise, she played the next phrase slowly, and May watched her hands with complete focus, the kind rarely seen in children so young. When Grandma finished demonstrating, May immediately attempted to replicate the passage. Her version was simplified, but the essence was there, the melody, the rhythm, the feeling. This is extraordinary, May's mother whispered, moving closer to the piano. Most children her age can barely keep a steady beat on a drum. Grandma Chen nodded, a strange expression crossing her face, part wonder, part recognition. I've seen this before only once. A boy in my music school back in China could do this. He went on to become one of the finest pianists in the country. She looked down at her granddaughter with new eyes. This child has a gift. For the next hour, they watched as Grandma Chen played short sections of Fur Elise, with May attempting to copy each part. By the end of the afternoon, the little girl could play nearly the first page of the piece, simplified but recognizable. What would have taken most beginning students weeks to learn, she had absorbed in a single sitting. That evening, after May had fallen asleep, her parents sat at their kitchen table speaking in hushed, excited tones. What do we do with this? Her father asked, replaying the video he'd taken earlier. I've read about musical prodigies, but I never thought. We need to be careful, her mother cautioned. I don't want to push her into something just because she shows talent. She's only 4, but we can't ignore this either. That kind of natural ability, it would be wrong not to nurture it. They decided to start with a small keyboard of her own, just to see if May's interest continued. The next day, they brought home a child-sized digital piano with weighted keys. They set it up in the living room without comment, curious to see what would happen. It took less than 5 minutes for May to discover it. She climbed onto the bench and, without prompting, began to play the parts of Fur Elise she remembered from the previous day. When she reached a section she couldn't recall, she experimented with different notes until it sounded right to her ears. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. May would wake up early and head straight for her little piano, playing before breakfast. Sometimes her mother would find her there in her pajamas, completely absorbed in the music. She never needed to be reminded to practice. In fact, they occasionally had to coax her away from the keyboard for meals or bedtime. Word of May's unusual talent began to spread within their circle of friends. Fellow musicians visited to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Some suggested specialized teachers, music schools, early admission programs. Others warned against pushing too hard too soon, sharing stories of young talents who had burned out under pressure. Through it all, May remained blissfully unaware of the stir she was creating. To her, playing the piano was simply something that felt natural, like breathing or laughing. She approached the instrument without fear or self-consciousness, experimenting freely and delighting in the sounds she could produce. 3 months after that first afternoon at Grandma Chen's apartment, May's parents arranged for her to meet with Dr. Rivera, the chair of the piano department at the local university. They were hesitant to have their daughter evaluated so young, but wanted expert guidance on how to proceed. They brought May to the university's music building on a quiet Saturday morning. The little girl looked tiny sitting before the grand piano in the recital hall, her feet dangling well above the pedals. Dr. Rivera, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, sat nearby with a notebook. "Just play whatever you'd like," Dr. Rivera suggested gently. Without hesitation, May launched into Fur Elise and now playing the first 2 pages with remarkable accuracy. She had added her own dynamics, playing some passages with unexpected tenderness, others with childlike exuberance. When she finished, she immediately began a simple version of Mozart's Twinkle, Twinkle variations that she had learned from watching videos on her parents. But after 20 minutes of playing various pieces, some learned, some improvised, May announced she was hungry and ready to go for ice cream. As her parents had promised, Dr. Rivera closed her notebook and knelt to meet May at eye level. "Thank you for playing for me today. You made some beautiful music," May smiled shyly. "I like how it sounds when I get it right." After May's father took her outside to the courtyard, Dr. Rivera turned to her mother with an expression of amazement. "In 30 years of teaching, I've never seen a child this young with such natural musicality. It's not just her ear or memory, impressive as those are. It's her innate sense of phrasing, the way she shapes the music. Most pianists spend years developing what she seems to have instinctively." "What should we do?" May's mother asked, voicing the question that had been keeping both parents awake at night. "We don't want to push her too hard, but we don't want to neglect her gift either." Dr. Rivera considered carefully before answering. "Find her a teacher who specializes in young children, but has experience with exceptional talents. Someone patient who won't rush her technical development, but will challenge her musical imagination. Keep it playful. At this age, the most important thing is that she continues to love making music." As they drove home that afternoon, May fell asleep in her car seat, clutching a stuffed penguin she had named Mozart. Her parents exchanged glances in the rearview mirror, a mixture of pride, wonder, and trepidation washing over them. That night, May's father found himself searching online for videos of young musical prodigies performing at international competitions. He watched children only a few years older than his daughter playing complex pieces with orchestras, receiving standing ovations, being interviewed on television programs. Could that be May's future? The thought both thrilled and terrified him. As if sensing his thoughts, his wife placed a hand on his shoulder. "One day at a time," she reminded him. "Tomorrow we'll call the teachers Dr. Rivera recommended. But right now she's still just our little girl who happens to love piano." In the bedroom down the hall, May slept peacefully, unaware of the extraordinary journey that had begun with those first notes at her grandmother's piano, a journey that would eventually lead her to stages and spotlights beyond her parents' wildest dreams. 6 months had passed since the discovery of May's remarkable talent. The living room of their modest suburban home had transformed into something of a mini music studio. The child-sized keyboard had been replaced with a proper upright piano, its warm cherry finish matching the bookshelf now filled with sheet music instead of picture books. Miss Lily, a retired concert pianist who specialized in teaching gifted children, arrived every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, unlike most teachers who struggled to keep young students focused for even 30 minutes. Miss Lily often found herself staying for 2 hours as May absorbed everything with an almost unnatural concentration. She plays with her whole heart, Miss Lily told May's parents after a particularly impressive lesson. The elderly teacher removed her reading glasses and cleaned them thoughtfully with the edge of her cashmere sweater. Most children her age can follow instructions and press the right keys, but they don't truly feel the music. May somehow understands the emotion behind the notes. By now, May had mastered not just Fur Elise, but several other pieces typically played by students 3 times her age. Her small hands still couldn't reach many of the more difficult chords, but she found creative ways to adapt, rolling the notes or using alternative fingerings that Miss Lily hadn't even considered. "What do you think about competitions?" May's father asked one evening after their daughter had gone to bed. He scrolled through his tablet, showing his wife a web page. "There's a regional youth competition coming up in 3 months. The minimum age is 6, but they might make an exception." May's mother frowned, tucking her feet underneath her on the couch. "I don't know. She's still so little. What if all that pressure ruins her love for music? Or what if it helps her grow?" He countered. "You've seen how she lights up when Grandma Chen and your colleagues come over to hear her play. She loves having an audience." They went back and forth for weeks, weighing the potential benefits against the risks. They consulted Miss Lily, who was cautiously supportive, and Grandma Chen, who reminded them that in her day, talented children were playing publicly much younger than May. One Saturday morning, their debate was unexpectedly settled by May herself. She had been practicing a simplified version of Mozart's sonata in C major, when she suddenly stopped and turned to her mother, who was folding laundry nearby. "Mrs. Kim's daughter got a shiny trophy for her science project," May said, referring to their neighbor's 10-year-old. "Can people get trophies for piano too?" Her mother set down the towel she was folding. "Yes, there are piano competitions where people can win trophies and medals." May's eyes widened with interest. "Can I try to win one?" That innocent question led to a family meeting that evening. May's parents explained what a competition would involve: practicing special pieces, playing in front of judges and an audience, being compared to other young pianists. "Some of the other players will be much older than you," her father explained gently, "and only a few people win prizes. Would you be okay with that?" May considered this with a seriousness that seemed odd on her chubby 4-year-old face. "I just want to play my best music," she said finally, "and maybe get a trophy to show Grandma." They decided to start small, a local competition hosted by the community music school. The minimum age requirement was indeed 6, but after sending videos of May playing, the organizers made an exception. They seemed more curious than anything else, probably expecting a cute novelty act rather than serious competition. The weeks leading up to the event established a new routine. May worked with Miss Lily to prepare 3 pieces: a Bach minuet, a Clementi sonatina, and her signature, Fur Elise. They focused not just on playing the right notes but on posture, performance etiquette, and handling nerves. "What if I make a mistake?" May asked during one practice session, a worry line appearing between her eyebrows for the first time. "Then you keep going," Miss Lily answered simply. "Everyone makes mistakes, even the greatest pianists in the world. The music doesn't stop for one wrong note." The morning of the competition arrived with unexpected chaos. May's special competition dress, a velvet blue number with a white collar, had somehow shrunk in the wash. Her favorite stuffed penguin Mozart was missing until the last minute when they found him tucked behind the piano bench. Traffic was worse than anticipated, leaving them rushing into the auditorium of the local high school just minutes before May's scheduled performance time. The backstage area buzzed with activity. About 20 children waited with their families, most between 8 and 12 years old. They clutched sheet music and water bottles, some pacing nervously, others sitting still with closed eyes, mentally rehearsing. When May walked in holding her father's hand, several heads turned, Whispers followed. Is that a contestant or someone's little sister? No way she's old enough to compete. A tall boy with braces leaned down to May's level. Hey there. Are you lost? He asked, not unkindly. I'm here to play piano, May replied with the straightforward confidence of a child who hadn't yet learned to doubt herself. The boy's eyebrows shot up, and he exchanged glances with his mother, who offered an apologetic smile to May's parents. A woman with a clipboard approached them. Machen, you're up after Tyler. Please wait by the stage. Entrance, she gave the child a curious once-over before hurrying away. May's mother knelt down and straightened the collar of her daughter's hastily ironed dress. Remember what Miss Lily said about mistakes? Keep going, May nodded solemnly. And remember what Daddy said about the judges? They're just people who love music like us. Her father gave her a quick hug. We're already so proud of you, no matter what happens. The stage manager signaled, and May followed him to the wings. Her parents found seats in the audience just as Tyler, a serious-looking 11-year-old, finished his performance of a Chopin waltz to polite applause. Next, we have a special young performer. The announcer's voice echoed through the auditorium. Making her competition debut at just 4 years old, please welcome May Chen. A murmur rippled through the audience as the tiny figure walked onto the stage. The grand piano seemed enormous compared to her small frame. A stagehand rushed out with a booster seat for the bench. Causing a few chuckles from the crowd, May settled herself, adjusted the seat, and then sat perfectly still for a moment with her hands in her lap, just as Miss Lily had taught her. The room fell silent. When she began to play the Bach minuet, the atmosphere shifted from amused curiosity to stunned attention. Her technique wasn't perfect. Her hands were simply too small for some of the finger positions, but her musicality was undeniable. She shaped phrases with a natural instinct that many adult amateurs never develop. Moving seamlessly into the Clementi sonatina, May's confidence grew. She swayed slightly with the melody, her face occasionally breaking into a small smile at particularly beautiful passages. The audience leaned forward in their seats, drawn in by the incongruity of such mature playing, coming from such a young performer. For her final piece, Fur Elise, May closed her eyes briefly before starting, as if remembering that first afternoon at her grandmother's piano. Her rendition had evolved over the months of study, more polished now, more intentional in its expression, but still carrying that same wonder of discovery. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began, hesitant at first, then building to enthusiastic appreciation. May stood and gave a small bow, just as she had practiced at home using the coffee table as a pretend piano. The rest of the competition passed in a blur. May sat between her parents, swinging her legs and occasionally whispering questions about the other performers. When it came time for the awards, she straightened up in her seat, suddenly attentive. The judges awarded honorable mentions and third places for different age categories. When they reached the 6-8-year-old group, the head judge paused. Before announcing the winners in this category, the judges would like to present a special award for outstanding young talent to May Chen. May's eyes widened as she looked up at her parents in confusion. That's you, her mother whispered. Go on up. With her father's gentle nudge, May made her way back to the stage, where the judge handed her a small crystal trophy shaped like a piano. It caught the stage lights, sending tiny rainbows across May's awestruck face. Thank you, she said into the microphone that the judge lowered for her, her voice tiny in the large space. Then, unable to contain herself, she added, It's so sparkly. Laughter and applause filled the auditorium. As May returned to her seat, clutching her trophy tightly, a distinguished-looking woman approached her parents. I'm Dr. Hiromi Tanaka from the National Youth Music Foundation, she said quietly, handing them a business card. I'd like to talk to you about opportunities for your daughter. What she just did on that stage, it was extraordinary. That evening, as May proudly showed her trophy to Grandma Chen over a video call, her parents sat at the kitchen table with Dr. Tanaka's card and a growing stack of notes. The National Junior Piano Competition is in 6 months, her father read from his tablet. Participants from all over the country. Some go on to international events. And the World Youth Piano Festival is accepting applications for next year, her mother added. It's in Vienna. Can you imagine? Vienna. They looked at each other, excitement mingled with trepidation. In the living room, they could hear May playing a simple tune she had made up herself, periodically stopping to say something to Mozart the penguin, who had been positioned on the piano to watch her practice. "Are we really considering this?" her mother asked. "Taking a 4-year-old into the world of serious classical music competition?" Her father glanced toward the living room where May was now singing along with her playing, completely absorbed in her own musical world. "Maybe the question isn't whether we're pushing her too far," he said slowly. "Maybe it's whether we'd be holding her back if we didn't." The trophy sat on the coffee table, catching the evening light much like that old upright piano had on the afternoon when everything changed. Whatever they decided, they knew their lives would never be the same again. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its elegant cream envelope bearing the gold-embossed logo of the World Junior Piano Competition. May's mother held it with slightly trembling hands, waiting for her husband to return from dropping their daughter at preschool before opening it. "Well?" he asked, hanging his keys on the hook by the door. "Is it?" "I haven't opened it yet," she admitted. "I wanted us both to be here." 6 months had passed since May's first competition. The crystal trophy still held a place of honor on the piano, but it had been joined by 3 more awards from regional events. Dr. Tanaka from the National Youth Music Foundation had become a regular presence in their lives, guiding them through the complicated world of young musical talent. It was she who had encouraged them to apply to the World Junior Piano Competition in Vienna, an event normally reserved for children 8 and older. Together, they sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter on heavy paper. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Chen," May's father read aloud, "we are pleased to inform you that May Chen has been accepted as a special invitational competitor in the World Junior Piano Competition." They looked at each other, excitement and disbelief mingling on their faces. It goes on to say that while she doesn't meet the age requirements, the selection committee was unanimous after reviewing her audition recordings, he continued. "They're making an exception." "Vienna," her mother whispered. "That's halfway around the world." "The competition is in 3 months, he noted, scanning the rest of the letter. "That gives us time to prepare her. And ourselves." The news transformed their household. May's practice schedule intensified, though they were careful to keep it fun. Miss Lily came more frequently, now joined occasionally by Dr. Tanaka and other specialists recommended by the foundation. One coached May on performance anxiety, another on proper stage presence. A renowned piano professor from the conservatory helped select her competition pieces. Bach's Prelude in C major, a movement from a Mozart sonata, and a simplified arrangement of Beethoven's Fur Elise that had become her signature piece. "Why do I need to play it again?" May asked one day, looking up from the familiar sheet music. "I already know this one." "Because it's the piece that started everything," Miss Lily explained. "And sometimes the music we know best is the music we can play most beautifully." When they told May about the competition in Vienna, they tried to explain it in terms a 4-year-old could understand. "It's a very big competition," her father said, "with children from all over the world. We'll have to take an airplane to get there." May's eyes widened. "Can Mozart come too?" she asked, clutching her stuffed penguin. "Of course," her mother assured her. "Mozart wouldn't miss it." As word spread about May's invitation to Vienna, local media took interest. A reporter from the city newspaper came to their home, watching May practice and interviewing her parents. The resulting article, "Local Piano Prodigy 4, Headed to World Stage," brought a flurry of attention they hadn't anticipated. Their phone rang constantly with well-wishers, curious neighbors, and even a local TV station requesting an interview. Grandma Chen fielded calls from relatives in China who had seen the news shared on social media. The community college where May's parents taught organized a fundraiser to help with travel expenses. Amidst all this excitement, they worked to keep May's routine as normal as possible. She still attended preschool 3 mornings a week, played with neighborhood children, and enjoyed bedtime stories that had nothing to do with music. But there was no denying that their lives had changed. Calendar pages flipped, and suddenly they were packing suitcases. "Remember," Dr. Tanaka told them the day before their departure, "no matter what happens in Vienna, this is just the beginning of her journey. Don't let anyone rush her development. A talent like May's needs time to unfold naturally." The flight to Vienna was May's first time on an airplane. She sat by the window, Mozart the penguin secured with a seatbelt of his own, thanks to a kind flight attendant, watching with wonder as they rose above the clouds. For most of the long journey she slept, her head resting against her father's arm. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" her mother whispered across the aisle, watching their sleeping daughter, taking her into this world of competition so young. "I ask myself that every day," he admitted. "But then I see how her face lights up when she plays, how naturally music flows from her, and I think we'd be wrong to hold her back." They arrived in Vienna 2 days before the competition. The historic city was everything they had imagined. Grand buildings, cobblestone streets, and music seemingly everywhere. Street performers played violins in the squares, and posters for opera and symphony concerts adorned the walls. It was as if the entire city existed to celebrate the art form their daughter had so unexpectedly embraced. Their hotel, modest but comfortable, was filled with other competitors and their families. In the lobby, they noticed children of various ages carrying sheet music and practicing finger exercises on tabletops. Most appeared to be between 8 and 12, though they spotted a few teenagers as well. May attracted curious glances wherever they went. Word had spread about the exceptionally young American competitor, and people whispered as they passed. Some seemed skeptical, others amused, as if the whole thing were a publicity stunt rather than a serious entry. The day before the competition, they attended an orientation at the historic concert hall where the event would take place. The building itself was intimidating, centuries old with elaborate gold decorations and a stage that had hosted some of the greatest pianists in history. May stood in the center of the empty hall, looking up at the ornate ceiling with its painted angels and musical instruments. "The piano will be bigger than the one at home," her father warned gently, "and the bench might feel different." May nodded, suddenly looking very small in the vast space. For the first time since this journey began, her parents saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. At the orientation, they met other competitors and their families. Language barriers made some interactions awkward, but music provided a common ground. A 12-year-old girl from South Korea showed May how she wrapped her hands in warm towels before playing to loosen her fingers. A serious-looking boy from Germany, no more than 9, practiced silently on the edge of a table, his fingers moving with machine-like precision. "Everyone's so big," May whispered to her mother, a note of worry in her voice. "Size doesn't matter when it comes to music," her mother reassured her. "Your heart is just as big as anyone's here." As they were leaving, a thin boy with glasses approached them. He appeared to be about 10 and wore a formal suit that seemed slightly too large for his frame. "You're the little American girl, yes?" he asked in accented English. "I'm from Japan. My teacher showed me videos of you playing." May nodded shyly, half hiding behind her father's leg. The boy smiled kindly. "I was nervous, my first big competition too. Want to know a secret?" He knelt down to her level. "When I'm scared, I take big dragon breaths like this." He demonstrated, inhaling deeply and then slowly letting the air out. "Dragons are never afraid to perform, right?" May giggled and tried it herself, her small chest puffing out dramatically. "See? Now you're a dragon pianist," the boy said, standing back up. "Much stronger than regular pianists." That night in the hotel, as they laid out May's competition outfit, a simple blue dress with a ribbon sash, her parents tried to prepare her for all possibilities. "There will be judges sitting at a table, watching while you play," her father explained. "Just pretend they're not there. And if you make a mistake, what do?" her mother asked. "Keep going," May recited, the lesson now familiar. "The music doesn't stop for one wrong note." "That's right," her father nodded. "And no matter what happens tomorrow, we are already so proud of you." "Do dragons win competitions?" May asked suddenly, practicing the breathing technique the Japanese boy had shown her. Her parents exchanged puzzled glances. "Dragons can do anything they set their minds to," her mother answered carefully. May seemed satisfied with this response and went to sleep clutching Mozart the penguin, who was now sporting a tiny bow tie for the occasion. The morning of the competition brought unexpected challenges. The schedule had been changed, moving May's performance to early afternoon instead of morning. Their carefully planned routine was disrupted, leaving extra hours to fill with a restless 4-year-old who needed to stay calm and focused. They walked through a nearby park, where autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet. May collected a few particularly beautiful ones, tucking them into her pocket for good luck. They visited a small cafe, where she solemnly drank hot chocolate and practiced her dragon breaths between sips. By the time they returned to the concert hall, the place was buzzing with activity. Competitors warmed up in practice rooms, parents made last-minute adjustments to outfits, and volunteers scurried about with clipboards and schedules. They were directed to a waiting area backstage, where May would remain until her turn to perform. The space was crowded with other young pianists in various states of concentration. Some played silent keyboards. Others sat with closed eyes, lips moving as they mentally rehearsed. A few paced nervously, sheet music clutched in their hands. Among these serious competitors, May sat cross-legged on the floor, showing Mozart the penguin the pretty leaves she had collected. Her apparent lack of anxiety made her stand out as much as her age. A stagehand with a headset approached them. "May-chen, you'll be on after Dmitri. About 15 minutes. As if suddenly aware of the situation, May looked up at her parents with wide eyes. "What if I forget the music?" "Your fingers remember," her father assured her. "They've played these pieces hundreds of times. And what if the piano feels different?" "Give yourself a moment before you start," her mother advised. "Touch the keys gently to get to know them. And what if the dragons don't come?" Her parents looked at each other, confused again by this reference. "The breathing dragons," May clarified. "What if I can't find them when I'm scared?" Her mother knelt down and took May's small hands in hers. "Close your eyes," she instructed. "Feel your heart beating? That's where the dragons live. They're always with you, even when you can't feel them breathing." This improvised explanation seemed to calm May. She nodded seriously and stood up, straightening her blue dress. When the stagehand returned to escort her to the stage, she handed Mozart to her father and whispered something in the stuffed penguin's ear. "What did you tell him?" her father asked, trying to keep the mood light. "I said I'll play extra beautiful so we can both get a trophy," May replied, her focus now complete. Her parents watched from the wings as their tiny daughter walked onto the vast stage of one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. The murmur from the audience was audible even backstage. Surprise, skepticism, curiosity at the sight of such a young competitor. As May settled herself at the piano bench, carefully adjusting its height with the help of a stagehand, her mother gripped her husband's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. "She'll be fine," he whispered, though his voice held a tremor of uncertainty. "She's come so far already." On stage, May sat perfectly still for a moment, her eyes closed. Her parents could see her small chest rise and fall with slow, deliberate breaths. Dragon breaths. The grand concert hall fell silent as May opened her eyes. From where she sat, the piano bench felt miles high, and the gleaming black grand piano stretched out before her like a vast ocean of keys. The spotlight created a warm circle around her, making the audience beyond fade into shadowy silence. In the front row, 5 judges sat with clipboards and stern expressions. One woman with silver-streaked hair adjusted her glasses as she leaned forward, her pen poised above her scoring sheet. Beside her, a thin man with a precisely trimmed beard whispered something to his colleague, both glancing skeptically at the tiny performer on stage. May placed her hands in her lap, just as Miss Lily had taught her. She took one more dragon breath, feeling her chest rise and fall. The leaves she had collected that morning crinkled softly in her dress pocket, their touch somehow reassuring. With a deliberate motion, she lifted her hands to the keyboard. Her fingers hovered for a moment, getting a sense of the grand piano so much larger than her instrument at home. Then she began. The first notes of Bach's Prelude in C major floated into the hall, clear, precise, unhurried. The familiar pattern of arpeggios unfolded beneath her fingers, building a gentle current of sound. Unlike many young players who rushed through Bach as a technical exercise, May gave each note space to breathe, finding the hidden melodies within the flowing sequences. In the wings, her mother released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her father squeezed her hand. On stage, their daughter seemed transformed, no longer a hesitant child but a vessel for something larger than herself. The Bach concluded with a perfect cadence that lingered in the air. Without pausing, May transitioned into the Mozart sonata movement. Here the challenges were greater, faster passages, more complex dynamics, leaps that tested the reach of her small hands. Halfway through, she encountered a particularly difficult section. Her right pinky couldn't quite reach a high note while holding the other required keys. For a fleeting second, panic flickered across her face. In the audience, the bearded judge made a note. But then, as if hearing Miss Lily's voice in her memory, "Find another way," May adjusted. She released a supporting note momentarily, hit the high note, and returned so smoothly that few would notice the adaptation. It wasn't textbook technique, but it preserved the music's intent. A murmur rippled through the audience. The initial curiosity about the child prodigy was evolving into genuine appreciation. Even some of the other competitors watching from the sides showed surprise on their faces. The Japanese boy who had taught her dragon breathing nodded in approval, a slight smile playing on his lips. As the final notes of Mozart gave way to silence, May paused. The hall remained perfectly still, the audience seemingly holding its collective breath. This moment, the transition to her final piece, was crucial. She closed her eyes briefly, then began the distinctive opening of Fur Elise. The notes emerged with a familiar intimacy, as if she were back in Grandma Chen's living room on that first afternoon of discovery. But there was something new in her playing now, a deeper understanding of the emotional landscape beneath the famous melody. Where she had once played with innocent wonder, she now shaped phrases with intention. The minor sections carried a hint of wistfulness beyond her years, while the major passages sparkled with a joy that seemed to radiate from her small frame. She swayed slightly with the music's pulse, completely absorbed in its story. In the third row of the audience, an elderly man in a formal suit removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. Beside him, a young woman with a reporter's notebook stopped writing, her pen hovering motionless above the page as she simply listened. The head judge, a famously stoic conductor who rarely showed emotion during performances, leaned back in his chair, his clipboard momentarily forgotten on his lap. His expression had softened from critical assessment to something resembling wonder. As May approached the final section of Fur Elise, she took the music somewhere unexpected. Rather than building to a dramatic conclusion as most performers did, she gradually reduced the volume, drawing the audience closer, inviting them to lean in. The final notes were played with such delicacy that they seemed to float upward, like wishes released into the air. When the last note faded, the hall remained completely silent. May sat motionless, her hands still curved above the keys, reluctant to break the spell. 1 second passed. 2. 3. Then, from somewhere in the back of the hall, a single person began to clap. Another joined, then another. Within moments, the applause surged forward in a wave, growing stronger as it reached the front rows. People rose to their feet, first a few, then entire sections. On stage, May looked startled by the response. She glanced toward the wings where her parents stood, her father nodding encouragement. Following the protocol they had practiced, she stood and gave a small bow, her blue dress catching the light. As she straightened, something fell from her pocket, one of her autumn leaves, its bright red surface vivid against the dark stage floor. She hesitated, torn between leaving it and retrieving it. In that moment of uncertainty, she looked like what she truly was, a 4-year-old child in an overwhelming situation. The audience's applause grew warmer, touched by this glimpse of the little girl behind the remarkable performance. May made her decision. She bent down, picked up the leaf, and carefully returned it to her pocket. Then she gave another bow, deeper this time, before walking with measured steps toward the wings where her parents waited. The applause followed her, showing no signs of diminishing. As she reached her parents, the audience remained standing, their appreciation echoing through the historic space. "You did it," her father whispered, lifting her into his arms. "You were wonderful. Did the dragons help?" her mother asked, smoothing May's hair. May nodded solemnly. "They were singing with me." Backstage, the atmosphere had changed. Competitors who had earlier regarded the young American with skepticism or amusement now looked at her with new respect. The Japanese boy gave her a thumbs up as they passed. A girl from Russia presented her with a small candy from her pocket. They were led to a waiting area where competitors gathered after performing. May sat with Mozart the penguin in her lap, suddenly tired now that the adrenaline was fading. Her parents fielded congratulations from other families, translating as best they could across language barriers. A competition official appeared with a tablet. "The judges would like to see Miss Chen," she announced. Just for a moment, this was unusual. Judges typically maintained strict separation from competitors until after the final results were announced. "Both of us will come with her," May's father said firmly, no room for negotiation in his tone. They were led to a small conference room where the 5 judges sat around a table. The room fell silent as they entered, all eyes on the small girl who clutched her father's hand. The head judge, a distinguished man with thick white hair, spoke first. Young lady, we have been judging this competition for many years. Some of us have been teaching piano for decades. He glanced at his colleagues, who nodded in agreement. We would like to ask you something. May looked up at him with curious eyes. When you play music, what do you think about? The adults in the room leaned forward slightly, awaiting her response to this unusual question. May considered for a moment. I think about how the music feels, she said finally. Some parts feel like running in the sunshine. Some parts feel like when you're sad and looking out the window at the rain. I try to make the piano say those feelings. The silver-haired woman judge exchanged glances with her colleagues. And who taught you to play that way? May looked confused. Nobody taught me the feelings. The music already has them inside. I just find them. The bearded judge made a note on his pad, nodding to himself. Thank you, Miss Chen. That will be all. As they left the room, her mother whispered to her husband, What was that about? I'm not sure, he replied, but I think it might be a good sign. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of other performances. May, exhausted from the emotional exertion, fell asleep in her mother's lap during the final competitors' slots. When she awoke, it was nearly time for the awards ceremony. The grand hall had been rearranged. A table covered in gleaming trophies now stood center stage, catching the light dramatically. The competitors were seated in the front rows, organized by age category. As the youngest participant by far, May sat at the very end of the first row, her feet dangling well above the floor. The master of ceremonies, speaking in both German and English, welcomed everyone and began explaining the judging criteria. May fidgeted slightly, her attention wandering until the actual announcements began. The minor awards came first, honorable mentions, special recognitions for technical excellence or artistic interpretation. With each announcement, polite applause filled the hall as young pianists made their way to the stage to receive certificates and small trophies. Then came the main prizes by age category. In the 8-10-year-old group, the Japanese boy who had taught May about dragon breathing won 3rd place. He bowed deeply to the audience, his face serious but pleased. As the awards continued, May's parents exchanged puzzled glances. There had been no mention of a special category or exception for their daughter. Had the judges decided against recognizing her after all? Had the unusual meeting been to explain why she wouldn't receive an award? The head judge himself took the microphone for the final announcements. Before we present our grand prize, he said, his accented English carrying through the hall, the judges wish to acknowledge an exceptional circumstance in this year's competition. A hush fell over the audience. Music is not merely about technical precision or following traditions, he continued. At its heart, it is about communication, the ability to speak directly to the human spirit. He paused, his eyes finding May in the front row. Today we witnessed something rare, a performer who reminded all of us why we devote our lives to this art form. May's mother gripped her husband's arm tightly. It is therefore the unanimous decision of the judges to present a special award, never before given in the history of this competition. He gestured to an assistant who brought forward a crystal trophy that caught the light in rainbow patterns. The award for extraordinary musical intuition is presented to May Chen. The audience erupted in applause as May looked up at her parents in confusion. That's you, her father whispered. They're calling you to the stage. With a gentle nudge from her mother, May walked up the steps to the platform. She looked impossibly small beside the tall judge, who had to bend down to hand her the trophy. Thank you, she said into the microphone he lowered for her, her voice barely audible over the continuing applause. The judge knelt to her level. No, Miss Chen. We thank you for reminding us what music truly is. As May carefully carried her trophy back to her seat, she noticed the silver-haired judge discreetly wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. The bearded judge was smiling openly now. His earlier skepticism completely vanished. The ceremony concluded with the announcement of the grand prize winner, a 12-year-old boy from Germany who played with technical brilliance. But it was the tiny American girl with the special award who remained the center of attention as people filed out of the hall. Reporters clustered around them in the lobby, cameras flashing, questions called out in multiple languages. May, overwhelmed by the attention and still clutching her trophy, buried her face against her father's shoulder. "Perhaps tomorrow," her mother told the journalists firmly. "She's had a long day." As they made their way through the crowd, the Japanese boy and his mother approached them. "Your daughter has a gift beyond technique," the woman said in careful English. "She plays from the heart." Her son nodded in agreement. "The dragons were with her today," he said with a small smile that May returned. That night in their hotel room, as May slept soundly with Mozart the Penguin tucked under one arm and her trophy secured on the nightstand, her parents sat by the window overlooking the twinkling lights of Vienna. "What happens now?" her mother asked softly. "After today, people will have expectations, demands." Her father watched their daughter's peaceful sleeping form. "We protect her gift," he said simply, "and we make sure she never loses the joy we saw on that stage today." Outside, a light snow had begun to fall on the city of music, covering its ancient streets with a fresh blanket of possibilities.